In today's program, we are going to talk about driving a car and explain what it is that actually goes on under the hood. Finally, we'll demonstrate that manufacturing a car is almost as easy as pie. The advent of the automobile did not come about without some problems. Cars frightened horses. Carriage drivers had to stop, pull their horses over, and hold them firmly by the bridle. Even enlarging their blinders didn't help. The horses would still bolt. Many predicted an ominous future for the diabolical apparatus. Hundreds of people would die, run over by these high-powered machines, which at the time reached the incredible speed of 25 kilometers an hour. The naysayers were not all wrong. Thousands of deaths are caused on our highways every year. Actually, driving a car is no small feat. To an experienced driver, driving a car seems as simple as walking or running. And yet it's an intricate activity that involves the senses, motor skills, and one of the brain's most complex faculties, decision-making. That aptitude is crucial, for it only takes one bad decision for a driver to be facing a major catastrophe. 80% of highway accidents are directly attributable to human error. With every kilometer a driver puts behind him, his brain receives hundreds of bits of information. They are mainly relayed to him by his vision, hearing, and the feeling of balance. Sight alone provides 90% of the information. It's in his field of vision, which encompasses about 180 degrees, that a driver perceives the road and its users, highway signs, the information on his dashboard indicators. But the faster he goes, the narrower his visual field, since the images, at first steady at the center of the visual field, move faster and faster toward the periphery. At very high speeds, a driver's vision becomes virtually tubular, as if he were driving in a tunnel. He might not see an indication on the side of the highway. Furthermore, details are only clearly perceived on a small central portion of the visual field, a portion of perhaps 3 degrees. This portion corresponds to the part of the image formed directly on the center of the retina, on an area of distinct vision, the fovea centralis. As for the images formed in periphery of the retina, they are more or less blurred, so that in order to read a sign, the driver has to turn his head and to momentarily take his eyes off the road. Although it does not see objects, the peripheral retina does detect their movement. Therefore, should a ball suddenly emerge into the driver's visual field, his peripheral retina will spot it and inform him of it. The driver will then turn his head to see and identify the object. It's a quick reflex that takes only about 1/10 of a second. All the information perceived by the senses are relayed to the brain. They are in part integrated in the front lobe of the cortex. However, the experts still do not know precisely how the brain processes information to make a decision. One thing they do know is that every decision is based upon a limited amount of information. This means that the brain discards some of the information it receives to process only what it considers the most relevant. This phenomenon is known as selective attention. This is why a novice driver may not see a pedestrian on the side of the road, even though that information was transmitted to his brain. The brain will have eliminated it, choosing to focus instead on information that deals strictly with mastering the brakes or the steering wheel. Learning to drive a car is a little like learning to play the piano. In the beginning, all the movements are performed consciously. They are under the quasi-exclusive control of the cortex. but through repetition, the brain registers sequences of movements it associates with various stimuli, such as braking at the sight of a red light. From now on, the cortex loses part of its control to other nervous centers, such as the cerebellum. Thus freed, the cortex can now process information other than that dealing directly with controlling the vehicle. Every decision the driver takes has its own level of risk. Added to the road conditions and vehicle response are personal factors that can affect the level of risk of a decision. Fatigue, alcohol consumption, stress, but also the driver's personality, attitude, and even age and sex. For example, research has shown that young male drivers adopt more reckless behavior than female or older drivers. To try and understand such behavioral patterns, the researchers conduct studies in simulation. During these experiments, the subject sits in a passenger cell and reacts to situations presented on a graphic terminal. These tests have shown that compared with women subjects, young male drivers tend to go faster and make more mistakes. According to the risk homeostasis theory, everyone tries to generate and maintain their own internal level of excitement. And it would seem that this tendency is stronger in young male drivers. Behind the wheel of an automobile, a driver has a great deal of power, which, although it produces a thrill, can also be dangerous and destructive. Almost all the major improvements made to cars have been a result of observations made during car races. It's possible that an injection system developed for a Formula One car will eventually find its way into your next car. The term injection system may mean very little to you, especially if you only look under your hood when absolutely necessary. But if you only knew just how simple it is. The engine is in a way a car's vital organ. Whether it's an electric or gas engine, the principle is always the same. It converts an energy source into mechanical power. That power results in a rotating motion, relayed to the wheels by a mechanical coupling system that includes a gearbox, a propeller shaft, and a differential. Engines that use fuel as their energy source, such as gas or fuel oil engines, are called internal combustion engines. In such engines, it is the pistons that generate the power. Their up and down motion is converted into a rotating motion by piston rods. The latter, in turn, rotate the crankshaft, which is connected by gearing to the automobile's drive wheels. In a gas engine, each piston slides freely inside a cylinder, at the end of which are a spark plug and two valves. It is through one of these valves, the intake valve, that the gas-air mixture enters the cylinder. The fuel is first drawn in from the car's gas tank by a pump. It goes through the carburetor where, mixed with air, it is converted into vapor. It is this mixture of fuel and air that is sent into each cylinder. The piston's movement inside the cylinders occurs in 4 phases, hence the appellation four-stroke engine. On the first stroke, the piston is sent down into the cylinder, drawing the fuel-air mixture in through the intake valve. Then, when the two valves are closed, the piston goes back up, compressing the fuel-air mixture inside the cylinder. An igniting spark, supplied by a spark plug or an electronic ignition system, lights the compressed mixture. The dilation of the combustion gases force the piston down. It moves back up to vent the burnt gases via the exhaust valve. And the cycle starts all over again. The opening and closing of the valves is commanded automatically by a camshaft, driven directly by the crankshaft. Some internal combustion engines, especially those in commercial vehicles, use a heavier fuel than gas, fuel oil. These are diesel engines. In diesel engines, which have no spark plugs, the intake valve draws pure air into the cylinder instead of fuel. The air is then heavily compressed by the piston's upstroke, which increases its temperature. The temperature is in fact so high inside the cylinder that when the fuel oil is injected in the form of a fine mist, it ignites instantly. Since the compression of the air is sufficient to cause ignition, diesel engines must present a much higher compression level than gas engines. This requires a more powerful and therefore more expensive engine, but it is more fuel efficient. Diesel engines consume less fuel because its output is roughly 40% compared to 30% for gas engines. This means that in a diesel engine, almost half of the energy the fuel contains is converted into mechanical power. The search for higher performance, cheaper and more environment-friendly sources of energy has made the car with an electric engine the car of the future. An electric engine is mechanically relatively simple, and its output is about 95%. The electric engine consists of two main parts: the stator, composed of two magnets, and the rotor, through which a current supplied by a battery circulates. By rotating, the rotor turns the wheels via the mechanical coupling system. The stator's two magnets create a magnetic field. Similarly, the current circulating in the rotor generates a magnetic field. Subjected to both these magnetic fields, which tend to oppose each other, the rotor makes a half turn. A switch then reverses the current, at the same time reversing the rotor's magnetic field. The rotor then makes another half turn. The series of reversals of the rotor's magnetic field is what generates its motion. But conventional heavy liquid batteries respond poorly to the high energy needs of electric engines. The development of solid lithium and plastic-based batteries may solve that problem. Weight for weight, a solid battery supplies almost 5 times more energy than a liquid one. A prospect that may well revolutionize the automobile industry. In the beginning of the history of the automobile, some inventors worked on internal combustion engines. Others felt the future lay in steam engines, and yet others in the electric engine. No one knew which type of engine would prevail. It was perhaps Henry Ford who settled the question once and for all by using the gas engine in his famous Model T. Ford was a visionary. He was the first to mass-produce cars on assembly lines. The first cars that traveled our roads were works of pure craftsmanship, made one by one and entirely by hand. But mass production, introduced at the turn of the century by Henry Ford, an American, was to completely revolutionize the automobile industry. With the assembly work broken down into several operations, it became possible to make several cars at once, both faster and at less cost. Due to improvements over the years, some auto plants are now able to produce up to 300 cars a day. Cars are manufactured in 3 major stages, each one corresponding to a separate workshop in an assembly plant. First, the various body parts are assembled in one workshop. From this first workshop, the finished body is then sent along to the paint workshop. As the body, or chassis, moves along on automated overhead conveyors, all the grease on it is removed before the primer coat is applied, followed by the finishing coats. The vehicle, still only a shell at this point, will take on life as it goes through the third and final workshop, the finishing workshop. This is where all the engine parts are added by hand, right down to the cigarette lighter. Transferred to floor conveyors, the car goes through a series of workstations. At each one, the work is designed to be carried out within an average time of about 2 minutes. Assembly line workers have seen their functions vastly improved by the introduction of new technologies. The most dangerous or demanding tasks, such as welding and painting, are now done largely by robots. In this highly automated plant, 95% of the chassis is assembled by welder robots, sort of mechanical supermen. These 110 welder robots alone perform the work of roughly 300 men. What distinguishes robots from other machines is their capacity to perform various tasks while monitoring their own progress. This is made possible by 3 elements: a computer, an automated mechanism, and its integrated sensors. The computer, which contains the program of the tasks to be executed, first sends a command to the robot, which responds by going into movement. The sensors then measure the positions and speed of every joint's movements and send the data back to the computer. The computer gauges the difference between this information and the data in its program, and where they differ, instantly sends a correction command. The robot learns the various functions required of it through a control box. Each movement is reproduced manually, then recorded directly into the computer's memory. The robot can therefore only perform the movements it has been taught. Function programs such as these can also be developed from simulation software. The various maneuvers are simulated on the screen, then transcribed in a program that can be transferred to the robot's computer. In the body assembly workshop, every robot's computer is directly connected to a second computer. This second computer, besides regulating the conveyors, records the time it takes to execute every operation and notes any variance with the time prescribed. The data is then relayed to a central computer, the plant's brain as it were, the production controller. Based on the data collected, the production controller can compute the exact cost of every car manufactured and detect any irregularities in production time. Owing to a serial number assigned to every car, the central computer is able to monitor the progress of operations. The serial number is first engraved on the dashboard's firewall, then in the form of a barcode, which is affixed when the car leaves the paint shop. Optical readers set up at various points in the plant enable the central computer to locate the vehicle. The serial number contains all the information relating to the model being made, from its exterior color to the type of seats installed. All through the manufacturing process, every vehicle undergoes numerous inspections. This device, for example, measures acceleration and deceleration times, as well as braking distance. Once these tests have been completed, the car is ready for its test drive. My friend Simon is a great collector. Every time I visit him, he shows me yet another new car. He has all kinds of them, from the most flamboyant, like the Ferrari Testarossa, to the most humble, like the Bug. Simon can talk about his cars for hours.